and welcome back to my YouTube channel. As you will see from the title, this video is going to be all about signs that I was autistic when I was a child, a teenager, growing up, that should have been picked up on, but they weren't. I'm going to go through the process of sort of social situations that I was in, things I did as a child, and also things that were present in school and probably should have been picked up on by people in positions of power, such as my parents, my teachers, people around me that probably did pick up on the fact that I wasn't like the other kids around me, but just didn't know that they were autistic traits, or actually just did nothing about it. And I just want to disclaim here that if you do some of these things, that does not mean that you're autistic. We're all human. There are lots of things that autistic people do that other people do. So you might relate to these, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're autistic. However, these things that I did were signs that I was autistic, because I have an autistic mind and I feel like this is where they came from. And a lot of them now are used when diagnosing or sussing out whether somebody is autistic. People just didn't know it then, or they ignored it. So I grew up in a it's not a small town, but it's a very small-minded town, and I feel like if you grew up in one of these, you know what I mean. I grew up in an area that was very deprived. It is one of those postcodes that will get you onto access schemes for university, because it's in the northeast of England. The schools didn't necessarily do great, and I feel like this did contribute to the fact that people just didn't know anything about autism, or if they did, it was little cishet white boys, you know? I was sort of raised like an only child. I have a brother, but he's a lot older, so he wasn't really raised in the family home with me, but he is also autistic. So growing up, my behaviour, there was nothing to compare it to, and if there was, it was another autistic child. So nothing really was abnormal, I would say, because everything that I did was seen as the norm to my parents, because that's all that they knew. Firstly, I was a very fast learner as a child. I could walk before I was 1, and I could speak and have full conversations before I was the age of 2. And hyperlexia is a big autistic trait, especially for female autism. I don't technically like to use that term because I am non-binary, that's how I identify, and also it's just a very gendered term. I feel like that just refers to anybody who's not a cishet white boy. A lot of these female autistic traits tend to refer to marginalized autistic people who have masked heavily their entire life as an autistic person. But hyperlexia is a massive autistic trait, and that's what I was, and I feel like it came down to pattern recognition. I was very good at picking up on letters and numbers, and I learned to read very, very quickly because I recognized patterns in things, and I feel like and echolalia, I feel like I did a lot of that as a child, repeating things, picking up on rhythms, picking up on patterns and repeating them in my head, whether it was out loud or in my head, whatever. I feel like that was a massive way of me learning, which is a very normal and natural thing for a lot of children to do. Echolalia is very present in young people when they're learning to speak. It's just that's followed me throughout my entire life, and it's very common for autistic people to have echolalia. I feel like that's how I learn. I was far beyond my peers when I was in nursery and early school, and whilst no, that doesn't necessarily mean that I was autistic, on top of everything else, I can see how it relates. And I used to, one of the things that my mum really picks up on, when the district nurse would come out, when you're sort of, I think they come out up until you're 2 years old, every couple of months, just to see how you're growing. One of the things my mum mentioned was that she was really, really impressed with the way that I stacked and organised my toys. I had these coloured blocks that I would stack up in colour order, and they would have to be perfect. I would do it upwards, and then I would do it downwards, and then I'd separate them into colours, and I would always tidy my toys away. I'd always put them into sections, which when you listen to parents or autistic children talk about like their traits when they were younger and growing up, that's a massive one. It's a massive thing of autistic people organising things. And again, I think that came down to pattern recognition. Things had to be in a specific order. And it's not that they had to be, that's just what felt natural. That's how I felt it should be, you know? And that's what I did. Another major thing of my traits growing up was food. I have always been a very fussy eater, And it's mainly that I eat the same things on a cycle, and that's what I did when I was younger. I ate pasta, pizza, bread, and every meal that I had with my family, I'd always have a very basic version of what my parents were eating. I never had veg, I didn't like sauce, I didn't like things in sauce. I ate the same things over and over and over because it felt safe to me, and I didn't like texture. I didn't have school meals, I took packed lunches because I didn't like anything that they served, and I hated the fear of not knowing what it was going to be. They didn't tell you. You would just walk into the school dining hall and they'd be like, you're having this for lunch, and I would just be like, I don't know what that is, it looks foul. And I'd just panic anytime I would have to eat school dinners, whether you were going on a trip and they gave you a packed lunch or whatever. So I was a packed lunch kid in school because I trusted my mum to make the food that I liked, and I would panic if it wasn't what I wanted. I think, honestly, for 3 years of my school life, I had tuna pasta every single day for my dinner. Every single day. For years. No wonder I have deficiencies. Like nutrient deficiencies, because I just eat the same things that are just like full of nothing. They've got nothing in them. And my mum used to put smiley faces on my food to encourage me to eat. So she'd buy Smarties tubes and she'd put little eyeballs on and then a smiley face, and that would encourage me to eat things like sandwiches, wraps, things like that. I always had very strange food preferences. I ate a lot of chocolate spread sandwiches, a lot of chocolate spread wraps. People thought it was disgusting, but to me it was safe. And I still have fussy tendencies now. I have my comfort foods, I have the food that I go to when I'm stressed, I have the food that I will always want to eat regardless. Socializing as a child. I don't really remember much of this, but when I was going through my autism diagnosis and my dad was talking about me as a child and the things that he maybe picked up on as being outside of the norm, it was the way that I socialized as a child. I had a very sociable childhood, but I myself was not necessarily the most sociable person. My parents, when they were together, we had family friends that we would sort of rotate going to each other's houses for parties, and there would be so many people. I'm talking like 30 plus people at this big party. They just did any excuse for a party, whether it was somebody's birthday, anniversary, Christmas, Halloween, somebody got a new house, anything. And it's because they all had kids as well, so it was sort of like the adults in one room, the kids in the other, and we would just play. And I look back at this and think that it was fine, but my dad said that I was a very isolated child. I would play for half an hour, but then for the rest of the time I would sit on my own. Whether I would play on my own, I'd have my head in a book, or I would just sit, or I'd have a nap, or I'd sit outside. I don't remember any of this, but it makes sense. I think a lot of the socializing I did as a child, I sort of dissociated at the time, and I don't really remember it because the only thing that I do sort of remember is feeling uncomfortable. And whenever I go into the space where the adults were, I didn't know how to speak to them. I found it incredibly awkward. I did not know how to have conversations with adults. It would be to the point where I would just laugh in their faces, and it wasn't because I found it funny, it was because that's the only response I felt would come out of me at the time. It didn't match up to the tone of the conversation, but I just felt so uncomfortable. Same with if I ever had to answer the phone for my parents because they were upstairs and it'd be like, it's so and so, I would just laugh because I felt so uncomfortable. I didn't know what to say. It's the only response that would come out of my body. That was my emotional response. And listening to my dad talk about the way that I was socialized as a child, I do not understand how nobody picked up on the fact that I was autistic, because that was blatantly obvious. The way that I socialized, that's the stereotype of autism, is like not being able to socialize, and I was that stereotype as a child in the way that I socialized, and I don't understand how nobody picked up on that. Like, I hated going to those parties. The only games that I really enjoyed were the role-playing ones, because I feel like I'm really great at embodying characters, because I just watch and I pick up on pattern recognition and I pick up on all of these things that they do, and I felt like I was really good at acting, and that's what I enjoyed doing. But whenever it came to other games where there were rules, there were other things involved, I hated it. Whenever it came to just talking, I always longed to be like the other people. Like, I always would hope that's how I would grow up and be, because I felt like an outsider. And I am baffled that nobody picked up on it. I really, really am. And that's sort of how I was as a child in general. Let's get on to what I was like in school and the things that were just blatantly obvious and nobody picked up on them. We need to reform the way that teachers are taught about autism, and the fact that I'm pretty sure they might just not be. I feel like it's optional to learn about it. It's not necessarily a massive thing. Had they known, I think I would have been diagnosed as a teenager, because whew, boy was it obvious in school. So when I was in primary school and I was learning phonics, you know, the things of like how to speak. Come on then, chicken. How to speak. The things that you would get where it was like how to pronounce things, you know, PH is F, things like that. And ING is ing. I took this literally because I was taught a rule. I was taught that this is how you say things, so I took it literally. So I would go home and I would start speaking in a way that I had never spoken before. I was saying skipping, walking, loving. I wasn't, and I'm from the northeast, okay? I have a Mackem Geordie accent merged together. I do not say skipping, nor does anybody around me. We say skipping, walking. That ing is not there, but I got taught this as a rule in school, so that is how I pronounced it. Even things like H, I remember sitting on the sofa with my dad saying, no, you don't say huh, you say huh. Because that's how I was taught in school. I really, really had to quickly unlearn or learn sort of the outside rules that you weren't taught of, whilst that's how you say ing, that's not always how it works in practice, and not exactly how language always works. So there was all of these outside rules that you were just expected to know that I did not pick up on, and I had to learn how to do. I took things literally. And I think my accent as well. I would pick up on words. I would pick up on the way that people would say things because I could see that that's how they would speak. And sometimes it would be adult language. I don't mean swear words, but sort of words that were beyond my age. And I would say them and people would laugh at me. And I didn't understand why. And it's because it was language that was sort of above my years. But I was trying to pick up on what other people were doing. So my accent was weird. The language that I used was strange. And I tried to obey by rules in language that didn't always apply to real life, you know? That didn't get picked up on, even though it was a massive thing. I was very impressionable in school because I wanted to be liked. I sort of got taken advantage of when I was in primary school by a specific person, and I didn't have the language to tell people, so it was essentially bullying and an abusive relationship, but this person was also a child, so like, don't really want to call it that, but it was very manipulative. She would bully other people and then blame me, and I didn't know how to get out of it because she was my only friend, and I was like, if I don't have her as a friend, then I'm not going to have any friends. Is this what friendship is? Because I didn't understand how to socialize, so I didn't really realize what was wrong and what was right until people told me that it was. So I was very, very impressionable because I didn't understand the rules and the laws around friendship. That was something that I had to learn. And I think now looking back, whilst that's not necessarily specifically an autistic trait, I can see how that manifested because I was autistic, you know? Personally, I think that I can see a point in my life where I heavily started to mask. I do think there were points in primary school where like it sort of dripped in. I definitely did mask. But I think when I hit secondary school, that's where the mask went on. It was on and it was tight, and it very, very, very rarely dropped. And I think that was because I moved into an environment where the social expectations, the social constructs, the social rules were so different. When you get to secondary school, and I don't want to talk about it now because I don't know what it's like. It's been a long time since I was in school, but it's so different when you hit secondary school. The socializing in secondary school, in UK secondary schools, is just, it terrifies me. It really does. All of these sort of the popular kids, the cool kids, that's embarrassing. You shouldn't do that. Those are the nerds. Those people are embarrassing. We don't talk to those people. Those people are cool. That's great. You do that in class. If you like that, no. All of these different things just like bombarding my brain. I did not understand. And the only way that I could blend in was putting on a mask. And it was definitely not a conscious thing. I think there's a misconception with masking that it's always a purely conscious thing that you're doing, and I think if you do it for so long, it's a survival mechanism that just clicks in when you consciously or subconsciously feel like you're an outsider. You switch it on to blend in and hope that nobody notices, and it just becomes a subconscious thing that you do. And I did that. I realized pretty quickly that I was not like other people, and I did not know why. So I was trying to mimic other people. And weirdly, I was sort of in with the popular kids when I was in year 7, which is the first year of secondary school in the UK, or in England at least. I was in with that group, but I felt like the outsider within that, and I tried to get along with that. I tried to mimic what they were doing. I tried to mimic their fashion, their tone, the people that they would speak to, what they found funny, what their likes were. I hid what I liked. I was a theatre kid. I had intense special interests that sort of were what the popular interests were at the time. I was a nerd. I was geeky, but I hid it. And I ended up moving school in year 7 because I could not blend in properly. I, again, was very impressionable. I got dragged along with people that I ended up getting involved in things that I should not have been getting involved in, getting in trouble in school for things that I hadn't done, but I didn't know how to say no. And whilst I had such a strong sense of justice, I think that battle of, I know that this is wrong, but if I say something, I'm gonna lose my friends, I'm gonna lose what helps me blend in. So I ended up leaving and moving to the more central secondary school in my area, where I had friends from primary school there, but they weren't my best friends. So I ended up having to move to a brand new school, and at that point, my anxiety, I did not realise it was anxiety. Looking back, I know that it was. I was the most anxious little kid. Everything. Walking to school, going to the shop, doing anything, looking at people, walking from one classroom to the next. I was riddled with anxiety. Everything. Every interaction made me feel sick, to the point where I was pretending to be sick so I didn't have to go into school. I got severe migraines as a child because I was riddled with anxiety. I was overly masking. I got aura migraines to the point where I would go blind. You would see auras in your vision that would just get bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point where it would just encompass my entire vision and I wouldn't be able to see. For like a day or two, they would make me lose the ability to read. I would have these severe migraines and nobody looked into why. And thinking back, it was because I was so anxious. I was overworking myself in school because on top of all of my studies, I was trying to find friends. I was trying to blend in. I had anxiety. I was so unwell. I was so unwell as a child, and I feel so sorry for my younger self because nobody picked up on it because I was masking, so I blended in. And I thought I was doing a good job, but I wasn't. I feel so sorry for little Ella because I hid the fact that I was going to theatre classes after school, like the theatre club after school. I hid the fact that I was doing that from other people in school because I didn't want them to know. I very quickly learned to not bring up my special interests because I would just get laughed at. And secondary school for me was really hard, and I didn't admit it at the time, but looking back, it was terrible. It was horrible. It was such a horrible experience. A misconception with masking is that because we use the term blend in, that we think it means blend in so that you're not seen. My way of masking to blend in was I tried to mimic the popular kids. I tried to mimic the loud ones because they were liked. They were the ones that people found funny. They had friends. So I tried to mimic the class clown. So my version of blending in was blending in with that type of person. And it didn't work. Because I was autistic, I wasn't understanding social situations. So I was trying to mask. And whilst I did seem like one of those kids, I was the annoying one. I was perceived as the weird one, the annoying one, the one that people didn't want to have anything to do with, because I was I was trying to be the class clown and it wasn't working. I did end up having a friendship group, but again, I felt very much like the outsider and I lost a lot of friends. I felt like I was floating. I was one of those floaty people that I was sort of friends with everybody, but not close, you know, and it wasn't until year 9, 10 that I really found a solid friendship group. And I think that's because that class clown masking technique disappeared a little bit because I realised it wasn't working. Whew. Yeah, I was annoying. I can see why people didn't like me, but it wasn't me. It wasn't me, it was fake. Then I can see where the sense of justice came through. A lot of autistic people talk about having a sense of justice, and for me, I think it's because we have such a social construct that if something is wrong, especially British people, oh my god, you just ignore it. It's not your role to get involved. If something's going wrong, you just ignore it. And I don't understand that construct. If something is wrong, if I see something wrong, I say something. I'm like, whoa, that's fucked. If somebody was getting bullied in front of me, I would say something. If I thought that a rule in school was undermining students, I would say something, and I could not keep my mouth shut. And it's because I don't understand that social construct of you just have to grin and bear it, because why should we? So having to say sorry for something that I'd not done, you know that thing where it's like somebody does something to you, you retaliate, then the teachers like both apologize to each other. I would refuse. I got into so much trouble at school for refusing to say sorry for things that I hadn't done because I didn't understand it. Like I don't understand why that's a social construct and why that's a rule. And people be like, it's polite. It's not polite. It's fucking rude to ask somebody to apologize for something that they've not done. And I was constantly calling things out in school, again to the point where people found me really annoying and insufferable, and I get it, I really do. I think the biggest thing that my teachers should have picked up on but just didn't was the way that I learned and the way that I, come on, I feel like I'm not in focus. The way that I learned and the way that I would take notes, the way that I would ingest information was very, very different to other people. I had one teacher, I basically had a teacher that I had throughout my school years, off and on, who had a very specific way that he wanted us to display our work, and I hated it. It didn't make sense in my mind. It didn't display information in a way that I found useful for me. So I didn't do it. He would always be like, I want you to stick stuff here, write the title there, and write your work like this. And I just refused. I was like, sir, that does not work for me. And he punished me for it. I had to go to a lot of after school lessons that I didn't need to be at. I had a lot of detentions. I had a lot of having to stay behind after class to change my work because it didn't work for him. And I just kept saying, it was also that sense of justice in me as well. It's my learning. It's my exams, it's me that needs to retain this information. I should be able to do that in the way that works for me. And that just didn't cut it for him. He got angry with me, I would get wrong for things, and that happened in a lot of different lessons. It wasn't until I got to sixth form where you have a little bit more freedom, or you did in my school, with the way that you displayed your work. You didn't have to use school notebooks, you could use your own. I had a little bit more freedom with it, and I realised, oh, I don't learn the way that other people do. And sort of the way that I recalled information, I was very good at learning facts. I was very good at learning things that had a pattern to them. I was very good with, you know, your basic numbers. I really, really focused on the subjects that I loved. So I was a big art student, I was a big drama student, and I was good at it. And it meant that other subjects fell behind. I just wish that somebody had picked up on that, because all of those things, everything that I've just listed behind this should have been enough for somebody to go, I think there's something going on there. And it's because most teachers just didn't know. Their view of autism, again, was a cishet white boy, that like naughty school kid, somebody that's really great at maths. All of those stereotypes of autism, they just didn't know. Or if they did, they didn't apply it to somebody like me because I was seen as a woman. I was just an awkward, anxious school kid. It wasn't autism, but it should have been picked up on. And I think back, school, I know I've said it, but it was so hard. I was exhausted 24/7. I was exhausted. The weekends were not long enough. I would have to prep myself going into school for the Monday. I hid in the art classroom. So the friendship group that I managed to develop when I was like end of year 9 going into year 10, a lot of them who I'm still friends with now, they are my main friendship group. All of us neurodivergent in some way, because neurodivergent people flock towards each other because we feel safe. We just didn't know it at the time. It was just a bunch of queer neurodivergent people hiding in the art classrooms. I bet you haven't heard that stereotype before. Yeah, we hid in there. Break times and lunch times, that's where I would hang out. I very rarely went into the cafeteria space, and if I did, we stuck towards each other. And that was our friendship group, and that is how I survived in school. It was hiding away and trying to focus on the subjects that I did love. And I actually did really well in my GCSEs, and it's because I would go home and revise in the way that worked for me. I didn't go to revision sessions at school. I tried not to do the extra classes, and that got me in trouble because they thought that I wasn't doing the work, but it was because it didn't work for me. It just did not work. The way that they would lay things out, I'm very visual in the way that I learn. Cue cards and doing those tests did not work. I needed to create visual things with colour codes. I've got synesthesia, so like I needed to do it myself, because if somebody else colour coded things and it was wrong, whew, it just threw me off. So I revised at home, and I ended up doing very, very well in my GCSEs. I got 6 A's and 4 B's. I did okay in my A-levels, but I was going through a lot of trauma when I was 15, 16, 17 and 18. There was a lot of shit going on in my life that meant that I got thrown off in my exams, basically. I would have done a lot better. You can see, because I got an A in drama, and then something happened, and then the rest of my exams followed, and I ended up just getting C's, which is still great, but it's not where I should have been. I had teachers always saying to me, "You're quite odd. You're a bit weird. Oh, you're strange." Sort of in a jokey way, because I do have a great sense of humour, so there was a lot of teachers that I did get on with, who we'd joke with. And it would always be told, I would always be, "Oh, you're odd. You're a strange one. That's weird." Yeah, nobody went, "You're autistic. You're autistic." And they should have. It wasn't until I got to university and my routine was completely thrown off, because I don't think anybody talks about the fact that, I'm going to speak from the UK here, when you're the age of 4, when you go into school, that pattern stays with you up until you're 16 to 18. You literally have that for 12 to 14 years of your life. You are in that Monday to Friday, 9 till 3 pattern, except for the holidays. That's how your life is growing up. And then suddenly when you go to university, unless you're doing a full-time degree like medicine, your routine is completely different. It's just completely thrown off, and that fucked with me. That really fucked with me. And that's when I started to realise this difference in my brain. I think it's a lot more than just being the weird one. There's actually a label for this, and I ended up having to figure out the autism all by myself. And when I tell people, like when I told my family, they'd be like, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense." And I'm like, yes, it does make sense. Yes, it does. And you should have figured it out. You should have figured it out. Being undiagnosed as a teenager and as a child is hard. It is hard. You feel broken. You feel like there's something wrong with you. You feel like everybody's in on this joke. Some inside joke that you've just not been told. You feel like everybody's part of a game that you don't have the rule book for. And it's exhausting. Trying to figure it out. Trying to blend in. Like you're gonna get eliminated if somebody figures out that you don't have the rules, or you're the imposter here. One big game of Among Us. It's hard. And to be honest, I don't think this list, I think this list could go on and on and on of things. But the big one for me was the way I was in school. I hope that this video has been helpful. What were your autistic traits growing up if you were late diagnosed that people should have picked up on? What were the signs in your childhood that you were autistic and were ignored or weren't picked up on? Let me know in the comments. Let's have a conversation about it. Let me know what you want to see from my channel. This is the first sit down video I've done in a very long time. I've got a new camera, so it's kind of helping. I want to vlog more, I want to share my life more, so let me know what you want to see, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye!